Okay, this is our last lesson using trig, and this is more using trig in terms of its relationship to algebra. So what we're going to do here is we are going to actually graph the function sine and cosine. We're not going to do tangent, even though we use tangent in the geometry lesson. We're just going to graph sine and cosine, and we're going to relate this to our transformations we've done in our earlier lessons. So first of all, you need to know the basic graphs for sine and cosine. Sine has first also I need to tell you, these are in what are called radians. So remember in our calculator when we went to mode and we put it in degrees for the geometry lessons? When you're in algebra, a lot of times you do it in what is known as radians. So if you went to the calculator and press mode, there's a setting called radian, and you would put that on radian for this particular lesson in terms of graphing. But sine has what's called an amplitude. Now, all an amplitude is how high it goes. It has an amplitude of 1, and then it has a period of 2 pi. Period of 2 pi. So an amplitude of 1 and a period of 2 pi. Amplitude is just how high it goes. Now it also goes below that to -1, and a period is how far it goes. Now actually sine and cosine graph on forever, but we're only going to graph one period. So here's what it would look like. Sine would go from 0, and then at pi over 2 it's going to get up to 1. And then at pi, it's going to come back down to 0. Then it's going to repeat this reflected. So at 3 pi over 2, it goes to -1, and then it goes back to 0 at 2 pi. So a period of 2 pi from 0 to 2 pi, and an amplitude of 1 here and here. Cosine is similar, except that at 0, it starts at 1. So it looks like this. It starts at 1, then at pi over 2 it goes through 0, and then comes down to -1 at pi, goes through 0 at 3 pi over 2, and returns back to 1 at 2 pi. So again, it has a period of 2 pi, but the graph looks a little different. Okay, so you got to know the basic graphs in order to do these others. Now, all that we're going to do here is we are going to graph these using all of our shifts, okay? So remember how we talk about when it's with the x, it's not what you think. So in this particular case, that means you move it to the right, pi over 6. Okay, now, first of all, we got to identify where pi over 6 would be. So pi over 6 would be, let's see, if that's pi over 2, half of that would be pi over 4. So pi over 6 is going to be like somewhere maybe right in there. So now all I do is I repeat this same thing. Now, again, remember, it crossed at 0, and at pi, and at 2 pi. So now all that's going to happen is now it's going to cross slightly past that pi plus pi over 6 because I've moved it pi over 6 over. And then it's going to hit it again here at 2 pi over 6. So now all I'll do is just do the same graph. That's not very good. Let me try that again. So we go up, come through. I kind of missed it there, and then back up. Okay. Cosine. What does this do? That shifts to the right, pi over 2. So going back up here, instead of starting here at 1, now I'm going to start at pi over 2 at 1. So now I'm up here. I crossed at 0 at pi over 2. Well, now I'm going to cross 0 at pi because I've moved it over pi over 2. I cross 0 again at 3 pi over 2. Now I'm going to cross at 2 pi. And then it's going to be at 1 again, not here at 2 pi, but at 2 pi plus pi over 2, which would be at 5 pi over 2. So again, it's going to look like this. Crosses down, comes down, goes up, and then back up. So it's the same graph. All that's happened is it's been moved over. Okay. Now, in this particular case, it's not with the x. Okay, it's not in parentheses. So that means this is a shift up. Okay, so now we're graphing sine. Sine typically starts again here at 0, but because it's been shifted up 1, It's going to go here. So the graph is the same, except now it starts at 1, and now it's going to go up to 2, and then come down to 0, and then go back up to 2 pi. So again, it's the same graph as sine up here, except that everything's been moved up 1. Same thing here. This has been moved down 2. So cosine usually starts at 1. But if I move it down 2, that means it's going to start at -1. Okay. Now all I do is graph this, again, going down. So typically it crosses 0 here, bottoms out here, comes back up at 0 here, and then goes up here at 2 pi. So, relatively short lesson. These are what are known as phase shifts. Phase shifts. All that means is we're just shifting it either left or right, up or down. And this is what your homework's going to be, taking the basic functions of sine and cosine and graphing them with shifts. So one thing I would suggest to you when you do this homework is to make sure you have these here with you or go on your calculator. Now let me tell you real quick, if you put these on the calculator, so you go to y equals, and let's say for instance you type in sine of x, and if you go to zoom and scroll down, there's one called trig, number 7. If you press enter there, it's going to graph the sine function for you. Now it graphs it on the left side and the right side. All we're looking at is the positive side. So we're just looking at this side right here on the right. So that would help you in terms of referencing what the graph should look like.